11:30 on my clock, so we'll get going. Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to this meeting, the Coeur d'Alene School District 271 for October 26, 2020. Before we get going, I'll just introduce the participants up front here. My name is Casey Morrisroe, and I'm the board chair. I'll be conducting today's meeting. I'll start over at my far right, and if you see, we got an empty chair there. Rebecca Smith's not with us in person. She's with us on Zoom today. So hello, Rebecca.
Hi.
And then Lisa May, and behind Lisa is Lynn Town, our board clerk. To my left is Jennifer Brumley, our vice chair, and Tambra Pickford, also a board member. And then Dr. Steve Cook, our superintendent, to the far left there. Let's see, no public comment scheduled for today, but email, comment can be submitted through email, through the clerk, or to trustees@cdaschools.org. Is there a motion to approve today's agenda?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, all right, thank you. And we've got several kind of information action items here. The first one up, we've talked about this a few times, but Dr. Cook took administrative discretion a few weeks ago, moved the high schools into the hybrid format, and so we just need a motion to kind of clean that up on the backside of that. So if someone wants to make that motion from the packet, or if there's any questions, I guess.
I'd move to ratify the decision by superintendent to change the schedule for all three high schools from yellow to orange blended learning. That decision took effect on October 19th, 2020.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on that motion?
Chair Morrisroe, can I clarify that?
Sure.
After that motion or after that discussion was made, we did have Venture High School reevaluated their circumstances and actually asked to be aligned to the K-8 schedule that we'd be running due to their small nature. So I just want to make sure that clarification is noted so it could be captured in that motion in some fashion.
So do we need to add that?
I think, Ms. Town, do you want to capture that in this motion, or do we could catch it in the resolution next? Either way? Okay. So, Jen, you made the motion, is that correct? Mm-hmm. Do you want to amend it to state that Venture would operate in the 4-day-a-week model?
So amended.
Okay. Do we need a new second then, Ms. Town? Okay. It's been amended. It's been seconded. Any discussion on the amended motion? Okay. All in favor then?
Aye.
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 You, Rebecca? Okay. And then next up, and this is a little, I guess, tricky since we met at the end of the day Friday. We've got kind of a couple things here. One would be, this was a regular scheduled meeting, and we would have talked about our kind of operating protocol and what we were going to do, but really we made that decision late Friday afternoon. And at least my understanding from Dr. Cook, maybe you can confirm, but really not a lot to report since 4 o'clock Friday to 11:30 today.
There hasn't been, Chair Morrisroe, there hasn't been a tremendous amount of information. We have had an update from Kootenai Health that the current 7-day period is, and this isn't the only data that Panhandle makes their decisions on, but Kootenai Health does keep us apprised of what they're covering, and right now their 7-day update on percent positivity is 16.6%. There's currently 34 people hospitalized right now, with 11 in critical care, and that's very similar to the data that was on Friday. And the incidence rate has crept up ever so slightly more again over the weekend. That's on the Department of Health and Welfare's data, which tends to lag just a little bit behind Panhandle Health Districts. So they're essentially catching up to what Panhandle had already posted.
And Dr. Cook, what was the incidence rate?
The incidence rate on the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare on their latest rate was 50.6.
So what I'd like to do, unless there's kind of specific questions or any specific discussions we want to have, is kind of just basically reaffirm what we did the other day. We don't need to do that formally, but just state that we're going to continue to monitor it, particularly the middle school level, and see what's going on there. And just state that if needed, we will reconvene the board if a change is warranted, whether that be to add more days or to go to a hybrid model. So, does that sound fair?
I'd just like to ask Dr. Cook, since we're moving away from the opening plan that we approved at the beginning of the year, we're going to need some metrics. I think the community's curious about what might change. We've gone from yellow to red, and we're kind of staying status quo other than our high schools. But for our middle schools, what metrics might we look for to mandate or necessitate a change?
I think that's a very fair question, Trustee May. I think part of what we've been dialing things back to is that the decisions on the high schools were what is the impact of quarantining and the absentees, both either absences or students absent due to positive cases, monitoring the case numbers that we currently have in those schools respectively. Today, over the weekend, we had 2 cases reported, one in a staff member, one in a student. One student, and then today we've had 1 student reported, and I think those are the things that we would be monitoring. And I think building some data as to what that would look like is our next step if we were going to switch between this kind of 4-day model and what would warrant moving either one of the buildings to hybrid or to all of them, to hybrid, I think is the next piece of that. And I think I'm not sure we're ready to report those hard criteria yet, but I do think that's the very next step we've got to get cleared up on, is that the changes that were made by the state plan, in which red became essentially this when the community shuts down, the schools shut down model. I think that's kind of the general consensus now, at least with the feedback we've been receiving across the state, is that when things like bars and restaurants and storefronts are shutting their doors, that's when we would essentially start to shut our schools. And I think that's the general consensus. That's the board's decision, of course, but I think that's the alignment that we'd be getting into, and that the hybrid at the elementary level and at the middle school level currently would serve as that stopgap between current status and when we feel like it's warranted. And some would argue that it might be warranted right now. So.
And do you have any information, and Nicole, I see, is here, she might be able to help us. Do we have any idea if any of those new cases were in school transmission, or do we have the contact tracing available to do that?
Chair Marisro, members of the board, Superintendent Cook, I do not believe that any of those cases were in school transmission. They had known contacts.
Okay. Thank you. Any further questions of Dr. Cook?
I have one quick question. If you can hear me all right and everything. Dr. Cook, one of the things that we had a lot of feedback on over the weekend was just the mental health of our students and our staff, and some real concern over kids when they're not in school, just what their mental health is like right now. I'm curious if you can bring back to the board and start just a discussion with some of our own mental health experts within our schools and our counselors, and really bring back to us how our students and our staff are doing at this time, and if there's anything that we might be able to do to better support them during these changes. So.
Thank you, Trustee Smith. That's a very real and very important question, and I think it's the one that is on the other side of the seesaw when we talk about shutting down schools. It's to what cost? And to some extent, I would even say not just shutting down schools, but the stress and pressure that we're putting on our students and staff in being in schools, especially when there's some evidence of transmission in positive cases in our schools and definitely in the community. So you're balancing both the mental health of what it's like to be at home versus what it's like to be in school, where it might be a highly stressful and complicated environment for whether you're in the high schools or you're in the elementary schools or middle schools. And so we'd be glad to bring our team and have them kind of discuss some of the stuff that they're dealing with in the system, both with staff and with students. It's definitely prevalent, and it's definitely a topic of conversation. And I would say that I feel like we're at least capable of entertaining the conversations now that we've got that staff in place. And it has been a tremendous input and source of data that has helped influence some of the decisions that we've made up to this point. But I'm glad to put them in front of you guys to answer your questions if you'd like to have that opportunity.
And Dr. Cook, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't we having two local pediatricians come to our November board meeting to talk about adolescents and COVID and how it could be affecting them in every way? I believe that was scheduled to take place. No?
It might be. I
know they've agreed. They're anxious to.
Yeah, I don't know if we've got that scheduled. Yeah, I'm not sure we've got that scheduled yet, but we would absolutely be willing and glad to have some folks come in and talk.
I think since we have two that are more than willing to participate, and I think that our focus could be on mental health, it'd be nice to hear some local pediatricians and their perspective and what we maybe could do to, augment our mental health services.
Yeah, I agree. I'd like to have them here as well if there's enough time.
All right, we'll clean that up after the meeting. We didn't communicate on that. Sorry, Dr. Cook. Okay. Anything else? Any other questions? Thank you, Rebecca.
No, thank you.
So when we put this agenda together, we had the resolution in there because that's the way it works, right? We've got to have the documents in the packet, and that was put together ahead of time because this information had to be put together 11:30 on Friday. We hadn't met yet on Friday. So the resolution is in there for us to change our risk category. But since we did not make a change on Friday, I don't believe it's necessary, even though Panhandle did change theirs. Because it'd be a resolution to stay the same course. So I think, am I reading that correctly, Ms. Town?
Is this on? If you wanted to change the risk category from the current orange to red, then you would need to approve the resolution that was in the packet. Otherwise, it would stay as it was approved 1 week ago.
Okay. All right. And so since we decided on Friday that we were going to stay the course, I assume there's no need for the resolution. Okay. Then let's move on. All right, Dr. Cook, I'm going to let you start with this next agenda item, which is a new quarantine protocol that you've been working on with some local health folks. So I'll let you introduce.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Morserow. Okay. Seth, can you grab this up on screen? So we've been working kind of hand in hand with both Panhandle Health District, local pediatricians, and a group called Quality Medical Care, I think. I don't know. It's a group of pediatricians and local healthcare providers to get some feedback on the idea of when students are asked to quarantine. The CDC recommends a 14-day quarantine for all folks exposed to a known positive case of COVID. That, as you well know, has been a pretty tremendous lift for some of our families. And at any given point, we've had hundreds of students quarantined. Most go on to not develop symptoms and are essentially at home for 14 days, missing at least the in-person, face-to-face part of school. And so we considered this conversation of, we currently have a critical workforce policy in place for staff, in which when staff come back, if they are asymptomatic and can produce a negative PCR test we would allow them to come back under some pretty strict non-pharmaceutical interventions and allow them to participate into work during that, after that exposure, once they get that result back. And that's typically between the 6th and 8th day of exposure, and they come back and we monitor them pretty strictly. And the conversation moved to, would it be possible or could it be available for students to have access to a policy or a procedure like that? And so we dug into this, and we've been in conversation with pediatricians quite extensively about whether or not that was something that we could put into place and have our medical professionals in the community support it. This conversation's been going on for quite some time now, and we have had some pediatricians support this. The Panhandle Health District has given us some level of support on this. They say, well, we would absolutely prefer that the CDC guidelines of 14 days are the standard procedure, that they are willing to support the board's decision. We do have a group of pediatricians at Coeur d'Alene Pediatrics that is willing to support this. We have a physician at Lakeside Pediatrics, Dr. Brian Hickok, that is willing to support this. And then we would continue to administer this procedure across our system. If we are seeking some more support, this has been submitted to multiple groups and not all have replied. This is moving pretty fast. And so I was hoping to bring this back to you in a much more tidy fashion than I currently have gotten it at this level. But this is I guess the current status of this now was something that you could at least see, and I think we've gotten some feedback as late as about an hour ago of maybe some slight modifications that we would still add to this. And so I would ask Nicole to step up to the microphone to help me with questions if anybody has any that they'd like to talk this through.
So, Dr. Cook, just while Nicole's coming up, are you feeling you need a little more time to further flesh this through the community, I guess, the health community, to get their support?
Yeah, I think there's likelihood of some mixed reviews on this because it is a step away from the CDC guidelines. And so there's questions about liability. There's questions about whether or not it's a safe set of circumstances to provide that. And I think it's possible that some pediatricians won't support this at all. They would just say, let's stay the course with the entire 14-day quarantine. And so I would suggest that we've got some support. I think we were in conversation with folks at Kootenai Health today. They would like to have more discussion about it. And so I think it's kind of at a place now where we could continue we could pull this from the agenda at this point. But I also am not confident that necessarily a tremendous amount more of people are going to be in support of this, just because of the unknown nature of this particular situation. I would be glad to talk this further with the folks at Kootenai Health to see where their stance is officially. So far, they are glad for us to meet with them some more and talk about it, but they are not prepared to say that they support this at this time. So I think I answered your question with yes. I would like to pull this if that's the board's liking.
Okay. Any questions on the draft that's been presented? As far as process, it's a similar process that we've been using with staff, is that correct?
Chair Marisro, yes, it is. Our critical infrastructure staff have been asked to stay out for quarantine 6 days and test. When that comes back negative, they've been able to return under closer self-monitoring. And so we would ask for students to have something similar. And so this document is written in a way that it applies to both staff and students.
And just to clarify that, so the critical infrastructure, that's a CDC recommendation. That was a change that was made by the CDC recently, and that's how our teachers were able and healthcare workers were able to come back to work. So it has the blessing of the CDC, is that correct?
That is correct, and also the Idaho State Board of Education.
And has the Idaho State Board of Education weighed in on kind of amending and giving us guidance so we can get kids back to school sooner? Have they?
They have not. They have taken no position on this at this time. There are districts across the state that have implemented something similar to this. But as far as an official statement coming out from the State Boards Association or the State Department, either one, neither have.
So day 7, they would get a PCR test. If that were to come back negative, then they could be admitted back into school with the negative test. And then I was reading parent guardian must sign a legal document stating denying symptoms and committing to the continued monitoring of the student for COVID-like symptoms on
Yes.
top of the negative test.
That is correct. So we've put in here a window on days 6 through 8 that we would ask them to get tested and be negative. They would only be allowed back in school if they are asymptomatic, and if any time during the remaining days of the 14-day quarantine they develop symptoms, they would not be able to attend.
And do we have any kind of record of what kind of statement Panhandle Health is giving us on this proposed policy?
Yes, I'm glad to read that to you. Panhandle Health District appreciates the open relationship we have with the Coeur d'Alene School Board. We do recommend that everyone adheres to CDC guidance. However, we would be supportive of decisions made by school boards.
Nicole, I know you indicated that there is no transmission, in-school transmission with the cases this weekend. And I think you were asked this question on Friday, so I apologize to ask it again, but do we have any cases of in-school transmission that we know of?
We believe we have one case of in-school transmission, and many of the high school students, it has been very difficult to determine where they've gotten it because of community spread. So I don't want to say that they are not in-school transmission, but it does not appear to be so. We do have one student that we believe is in-school transmission.
Okay, and I have one follow-up to that then. Of our quarantined kids, do we know how many quarantined kids have ultimately ended up testing positive?
And that question was asked of me on Friday. I did not go back and count it, but I would, at the time on Friday, I thought it was less than 20. I think now it's probably 12 to 15, but I did not calculate that, and I can get that number for you.
Dr. Cook, when do you expect we'll hear back from the Kootenai Care Network Quality and Control Committee? I know that's a large committee that represents many providers in the community. It would really be nice to know how they feel on this issue.
So I was speaking with officials at Kootenai Health today, earlier this morning about this, and they were going to request that we be placed on the agenda of the next meeting. I'm not privy at this point to when that meeting is taking place, but we are glad to have the opportunity to discuss this through with them and would look to get that feedback from them as soon as possible.
I'd maybe suggest, I think it would be good to hear back from them depending on the timing, so I'd maybe suggest that we just table this until Monday. And then at that point, we'll hopefully either hear from them or have an update of when they'd review this.
Can I ask a point of clarification? If we were to go back and count the number of students who were first placed on quarantine and then, or staff even, and then later tested positive, are you interested in only the number of students who were quarantined because of school-related exposure, or the number of students and staff who were quarantined because of any exposure? I think there's going to be a large difference between those two numbers.
I think that's a really good point. For my review of this new procedure, it would be far more relevant to me kids who tested positive on quarantine that only had the close contact in school. If they test positive because they've been quarantined because of outside of school contact, it's really not what I'm looking for in terms of the numbers. Both are likely relevant, but more relevant to me is if you can determine of those kids that have tested positive in quarantine, has that been due to exclusively having in contact in school?
Yeah, Nicole, I'd like to hear both. I just want to see how effective quarantining is really. Any exposure counts if we're catching something, preventing future community spread. So I would just be curious of those people placed on quarantine, whether their exposures at school, whether it's an athletic event, because we don't call athletic events technically in school, but they're an extension of our day essentially. So I think any relevant exposure would be applicable to this decision.
So I want to make sure I can clarify also. So it would be useful to know out of the, and these are not numbers that are accurate, but let's just say out of the 500 people that have been quarantined since the beginning of the year, we are aware that 200 of those have been because of self-disclosures of activities of things that have been going on that just has been communicated with us, and those quarantine numbers would be that later became positive is of use, compared to the numbers of students that have been quarantined due to in-class or in-school exposure that later became positive, is comparing those two populations, both quarantined and future positives. Is that correct?
But I think athletics needs to count as in school. It's one of our sanctioned activities, and so I don't think we can say just purely class time. It needs to be whether it's through club activities, athletic activities, any kind of traveling that we're doing, bus riding. I mean, any sort of, there's lots of extensions of our school day.
School related, right? Okay.
And I would just add that is how we are currently classifying it. Any school-related activity.
And for clarification, Trustee May, I wasn't inferring either that like outside of school wasn't school activities. Outside of school to me was like kids, I'll use just a bowling party as an example, running around outside of school and outside of school sanctioned activities.
I do think that we may not be able to get that number for you because we will try, but because so many students spend time together in school with their friends as well as outside of school, we have seen a lot of overlap in that. Whether it was we identified them as a close contact or they self-identified, the two match up inside school and outside of school, but we will try to do that.
I think there's broad support amongst the five of us that we'd like to get kids back to school sooner, and if we can do that, however safely, as possible, I think that is a top priority. But making sure we have support of our healthcare community and Panhandle, to be honest, I mean, they seem like they're the person that should be giving us guidance on this. They have the authority. They're our local health district, so I would ask for a clarification statement on them. Either yes or no. Is this a procedure that they can fully support? It's their responsibility, it seems, and duty as they're our guiding health authority locally to give us some assistance.
Trustee May, I would wholeheartedly agree with that statement. I asked for something that explicit from them, and I think their answer was they support the CDC guidelines and align to the CDC guidelines, and that's been a fairly standard position they've taken, but they also recognize that the board itself, the school board, is the entity that is responsible for making decisions on behalf of the students and families when it comes to school and teaching and learning. And so I think there's a little bit of reticence there, and that's been to some extent a little bit of a challenge to get them to land in a spot that I think, if anything, I'll just stop there.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's important to recognize, though, a community member shared recently, it's been in the headlines, we can reopen schools safely, and how do we go about doing it? And one of the articles that a community member shared was out of the Children's Hospital, CHOP, in Philadelphia, and it talked about the importance of local school districts working with their local health entity and making these decisions, since they are the healthcare professionals. And so I guess I'm feeling a little bit frustrated that we want to move to keep schools open, we want to keep get kids back in school, but we need authority, we need guidance from people who have the ability to make these decisions. And the data that we're seeing, schools that are successful are working very closely with their local health authorities. And so, whatever we can do to re-emphasize that, I'm happy to share this article with them that was just published last week on updated guidelines on keeping kids in school safely, but it's going to have to be through working with Panhandle closely to make these important decisions. And I'm not sure the five of us are really qualified to be determining when it's safe for students to return back to school. I don't know that I'm comfortable making that decision. I want it to be a recommendation from either Kootenai, Panhandle, or somebody who is in the position to make that decision.
I think that sounds great, but as I said Friday, I think that's, that's probably unlikely to happen, right? I mean, that's the way it's worked in Idaho for the most part on this, is ultimately the decision's going to be ours. And I think people don't want to take positions because they don't want to have to deal with what comes along with taking positions. So I think it's worthy of asking. I'd like to hear what the kind of pediatrics committee has to say. So hopefully between now and Monday we can get an update on that, or maybe hear from them again.
I'm glad to follow up on both of those and get some feedback in both regards, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Okay, thank you. So we'll see that next Monday. At least we'll have an update on that. If not, see it for action. All right. So our last item on our info part of our meeting here is eSchool presentation. I'm excited about this because it's not COVID related on a Monday meeting. And Ms. Smith, I believe you brought this up several weeks ago, and it's been penciled in to be on this agenda. So we will turn it over to Dr. Cook and Dr. Orozco and get an update on the eSchool.
So before I let Dr. Orozco start, I just want to let you know that both of the eSchool administrators really wanted to be here, but they were double booked with two separate IEPs that are currently going on right now. And so they've given us the reins and trust that we can do this. And so I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Orozco and let her present to you the kind of the introduction to eSchool.
Good morning, Chair Morrisroe. Good morning, board members. I think they trust us. I don't think they had a choice. As you know, there's been a lot of action among schools recently with the eSchool, and I want to talk about that a little bit. But right now, we're smack dab in that middle of that window when some students are moving out of the eSchool or will be moving out of the eSchool, and some will be moving into the eSchool, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But that probably is something in this presentation that's COVID related, and so we'll get there in a minute. Right now, Brian just helped me update the numbers right now, so that is a fairly accurate reflection of students who are right now enrolled in the eSchool K-12, and that differentiation between secondary and elementary students, with secondary having a few more kids than elementary. 90 students right now with IEPs, so we have a pretty significant special education staff there at the eSchool. We have 46 teachers teaching full-time in the eSchool and 23 that are part-time in the eSchool, and all of those people who are part-time at the eSchool are in the secondary, at the secondary level, and we'll speak to that in just a minute. And then we have 274 students that are on the wait list. I think that Brian said 20 more came, or 20 plus more students were added to the wait list over the weekend. And he suspects, I think, that that's directly related to Friday's discussions. And we have, it ranges all over the place why families went in or out of the eSchool. So we can visit about that in a minute. I put technology and furniture, but really from the very beginning, the eSchool, as you all know, we stood this program up in 3 weeks? Was that about right? And with the brevity of the decision making that had to happen in that time, these were some of the challenges that we faced and continue to face. Brian and Becky, so. If you're not aware, so Brian Kelly came to us, to the eSchool, having been at Lake City High School as an administrator, so he's now the principal at the eSchool, and Becky Miller was an instructional coach and is now the principal assistant at the eSchool. And one of their first concerns and challenges was how do we build community and culture among the staff? It's a K-12 staff. We don't yet know if we can all fit in the same room together to even have conversations about our beliefs and how this community ought to look. So they dug right in. They got some outside help with some coaching and facilitation. They spent a day or two in retreat. They used the Woodland lunchroom and spread out and had a retreat there before the year started. So they've come a long way, and it's pretty encouraging to watch some of the collaborations that are happening at the eSchool now, and in terms of building a set of beliefs that they all can live by. Furniture, technology, you all know that we worked really hard to get all of that stuff out of that building not very long ago. And so, as we were standing up the school, it was, we had to get phones working again and get Seth and his team busted their tails to get technology back into the building. Furniture, we begged, borrowed, stole. Maybe we didn't steal any. We begged and we borrowed furniture from classrooms, people donated from schools, and frankly, it's a hodgepodge, but it's kind of a cute little hodgepodge over there. You'll see some pictures. We're still working on things like chairs and bookshelves, and as you can imagine, we know that this space is temporary, and we don't see it being particularly good stewardship to invest a lot of money that we would leave there. So we're trying to be very thoughtful about what goes into those classrooms. Sound is a huge deal, and it still is, and we're working on it. But having 3 or 4 adults teaching in a room with a lot of energy and enthusiasm. I added a little short 30-second video clip to give you a sense for that. But having 4 adults, at most there's 4, but in a room smaller than this, of course, teaching with energy to a screen requires that they're all wearing headsets and mics, and even then there's a lot of bleed. So we've tried some things. We bought call center mics, thinking that might help with ambient sound. Didn't work real well. They've put more furniture in and around their spaces, so that seems to help a little. They've been on a rotation, some of the groups at some of the grade levels, so some work from home while some are there, and then they come to collaborate. So we're working on that. It's still not perfect. We discovered, I think it was last week in some of the rooms, that what actually seemed to be working better for some of the teachers were some of the gaming headsets that their kids use at home. Those, for whatever reason, those are working pretty well for a couple of the teachers. Challenges and solutions, collaboration, and it really is about space, finding room to gather K-12, a significant staff, and especially many who are part-time. And working from their schools, teaching just 1 class or 2 classes. It's been a challenge to figure out how do we pull everybody together for collaboration. And they're working on some things, but I think that they would love to have a serious space where they all could come together. And when I said space there, that of course means future space. Like, right, they know that at any point that site will be sold and they'll need some place to go. I think there was a little bit of reassurance hearing the discussion last week about there's a little bit of a hiccup there with the lien. So I think that's on the minds of the administrators and the teachers all the time. Like, where will we be? And we've looked at some spaces, and we're sort of working on that kind of behind the scenes, like what might be available and what might be possible. Rental spaces or whatever, but best case scenario, I think, for that group of people working there at the eSchool, it would be, could we stay here through the year? Is that a possibility through the end of the year? And we don't know that. Trustee Smith, I think you know this because I think your children are experiencing this, but there is a kind of a day-to-day routine for our kids in the eSchool. The elementary students, some who have left the eSchool have left because families have indicated to the administrators, I didn't realize everything I was signing up for, that I would really need to be this much of a coach and partner to my 6-year-old or to my 7-year-old. So that reliance on family as partners and coaches is a foundational piece, especially for our younger students. And in that day, we talk about a launch. So teachers launch the day and then and then land the day with kids. So that launch in the morning, they're pulling kids together for a morning meeting or a mini lesson or a check-in. And frankly, I'd love for you to see some of that happening because it's just darn cute to watch those teachers with those kids. Then throughout the day, there are mini lessons and there's practice and student work, of course. So never do we want to convey that the entire day that students at the eSchool are online with their screen the entire day. It's not how it works. They're meeting with the teacher, they're meeting with each other in small groups, they're doing some work online, and then they're released to go practice, to go write, to journal, to work on math problems, whatever that, to build their project, whatever that topic of learning is. And then they come back together and reflect in a landing. As I've been in the eSchool and classrooms a number of times, and often what I see are just 2 or 3 children on a screen, and the teacher's doing some small group work with kids who need particular support in an area. It's a very interesting and dynamic kind of relationship between teachers and students. This that you probably absolutely can't read is a daily mornings or a daily schedule, morning and afternoon. What it does is it gives you some breakdown of how that sort of works between time so that parents know when their students need to have those Chromebooks open. And there's some routine there so that students and families can get used to what a schedule looks like. My guess is since the inception of that particular schedule, I bet you it's been revised many times. And so that's a beginning look. And that's a different look for elementary. Because the 21 secondary teachers who are teaching there are teaching multiple classes, and it says 2 planned live sessions a week, and that's because they're using a block schedule, so they they have a good significant amount of time. What I've noticed with our secondary teachers at the eSchool is there's a lot of time spent one-on-one with students, explaining work and offering support and help. Brian is most concerned about those 23 part-time teachers. He said it's real tough. So when teachers are out in the buildings and they're teaching one class for the eSchool here or there, it's hard for them to understand. I think Brian's words were, it's hard for them to get a feel for how we do things here. And so building culture and connection and expectation between teacher and students and the rest of the eSchool staff is a very challenging thing. This is not how we would want it in the future. We'd want the eSchool folks to be one staff all together. But it's offering kids, the good side of that is it offers some flexibility. Kids are able to take classes that they wouldn't normally be able to take just because of the staffing, right? Every time there's a shift in the health of the community, every time we see the metrics change, every time there's any kind of revision in our own policies, that causes our families to say, I think I need I'd like to get my child into the eSchool. I need that stability. I need that safety. Or I'm really comfortable now. I'm ready to pull my child out of the eSchool and return them to our brick and mortar, our home school. That it's surprising the variety of reasons why families are making those decisions. And Becky and Brian are trying really hard to accommodate, to keep up on that waiting list, to check with people and see if they still want in. Right now, all of our schools will be checking the waiting list to see of those who said they want out and back at their home school, how many of those still went out. We're trying to be really careful about honoring as many of those as possible. I linked that transition waiting list document to sort of give you a sense of those numbers, and that changes daily. It seems to change daily. So at each grade level, you see the number of students, waiting to get into the eSchool and waiting to get out of the eSchool. And down at the bottom, you see a total of, there are more students, of course, wanting in than wanting out right now. What we've made a commitment that that the students who want to return to their home schools, we need to make sure that that happens for them. And that might require some shuffling at some of the schools. But as you see, those numbers aren't real huge, and those are dispersed among, 11 other elementary schools and a number of secondary schools. So it's just some work. It's especially difficult with secondary. I shouldn't say difficult, I should say challenging, getting them to a schedule at their home school that will match their learning so far and that will work for them. But that's quite a lot of shifting, and we're hoping that calms down as we be able to, as we're able to find, hopefully, at a district level, schedules that work for the kids that are safe, like these four days a week at the elementaries. Hopefully we'll see kind of folks taking a deep breath and saying, okay, wherever my kid is, we can live with this schedule, and it's what's best for us.
Dr. Roxwell, can I ask you a quick question? So the
Yeah.
students waiting to transfer back into their home school, do they have to wait? Are we waiting till the end of the quarter? Is that what they're waiting for? Is that?
Right. So by November 9th, all of the students who want to be returned to their home schools will be back in their home schools to start that next quarter.
Perfect.
And I think I maybe mentioned it, but maybe not clearly enough. One of the reasons I feel like I need that we have that kind of stability is the amount of time that our administrators are taking just addressing the ins and the outs and the transitions. It seems like it would be an easy thing, and it's just not with all the materials that the kids have at home from the eSchool, and there's just a lot involved in those transitions.
I had a question from a parent, and it was a complex question, and you're probably the best person for the answer, but they were curious. They wanted to transfer out of their homeschool into eSchool, but they chose to enroll in their homeschool through the open enrollment policy. So if they want to transition back into their school that they choiced in through the open enrollment, then does that process just kind of repeat?
We honor that open enrollment back to their open enrolled school unless they're maxed out and there's no room.
Okay, perfect.
That's, and you all have seen the numbers. Most places were pretty comfortable with the numbers still. So,
Perfect.
yeah.
Thank you.
You bet. We have some vision and hopes for the future. Our administrators are really excited, as are their teachers. They're excited about this idea that probably at the end of this year, when COVID completely goes away and there's a vaccine and we all feel normal again, and I get to see your smiles, that there will be some right sizing, that we know that a number of families have chosen the eSchool because of health conditions. And that's that option for them. And we know and we hope that there are a number of other folks who will. That just made me laugh. That they're in the color too, the red cheeks. There are a number of folks who are choosing the eSchool because this idea of a project-based school where there's a lot of fluidity between school and home and community, that those are some options that would be really exciting for families. So those are some of the things that they're looking at, place-based education, community involvement, getting kids out into the community to study and grow and learn. This idea of how do we develop portrait of a graduate characteristics in every single one of our kids so that they're on a trajectory. It's what we all want for every kid in all of our schools, but they want to take that project on through the lens of a place-based school. So that idea of moving from an online school for virtual learning to a K-12 innovation school, it happens to be online. That's really the vision of our administrators. And so they are, our work is to stand up a visioning team internally with students, parents, teachers, administrators, and then an oversight team in which we ask some help and support from our long-range planning folks to join that and to talk about space and that sort of thing. So they would, we'd really like to start to work this, I would say, within a month or two, once our numbers kind of settle down on that visioning work, and bring something to you then. I just thought you ought to see some pictures. So Dr. Cook, of course, that's Becky Miller, Brian Kelly, Katie Groutman, who was instrumental in helping them get supplies, resources, and books at the beginning of the year to families. That's Brian's funky office with no furniture. I put that top left picture in because that's kind of what they've been doing. So Brian had a real desk chair, like the kind we would all sit in, and he gave it to a teacher, of course, and took a folding chair because that's how they've been operating there, just making do, sharing, finding. Some of you maybe had seen, but that's a picture in the gym before the school year started for eSchool families. That's families checking out materials there. It's quite a process. Those white boxes represent materials that kids need and that they take home with them when they're in the eSchool, math manipulatives, electronics, you name it. And you can see why it's a big deal when kids either move out of the eSchool or move back into the eSchool, why that's the challenge is beyond just changing numbers. It's about materials. Pictures of... we were at the eSchool last week, and I was trying to find Becky, and she was out moving trash, emptying trash. So we've got work to do to stand up all the necessary support staff. So I just thought you'd appreciate that. We'll do whatever it takes. I think that they said that's their motto. I wanted you to hear what it's like in some of our classrooms. So this is a kindergarten classroom, and we walked in with Scott Murphy, who is our district, I think we've talked a lot about Scott Murphy, our district leadership coach. We walked into that room, and he was there about 20 seconds, and he leaned over to me, and he said, I just want to write on the board, this whiteboard over here, you four teachers are so amazing. But this is sort of what it sounds like in a kinder classroom in an eSchool. That lady, by the way, right there teaching, is Dana Sorensen, and she is a coach here at our district helping the elementary schools with writing units of study and the implementation. So she's actually modeling a lesson there on the screen for our eSchool kinders in that classroom. And the teacher of that classroom was outside in the hallway with her laptop open, watching that lesson unfold and learning from out in the hallway so that she could hear so that she could hear what was going on. But it's pretty fascinating. It's a pretty remarkable learning environment. And I'm sure it doesn't fit every family, but we've sure had a lot of encouragement from a number of families who are really appreciating it. And I think that's it, unless Dr. Cook has anything you want to add.
I think just quickly what I would add is that the amount of impact that these 50 or so people have had in a time frame that is just unfathomable, and how they've managed to pull that off with a shoestring and just what we've asked them to do is just absolutely impressive. And I love going there because it's exactly like what you would imagine. It's people being so animated in front of a video screen with a camera facing them and selling that. Every one of them is an actor, and they're committed to it, and they're just taking it on. And our kids some kids are thriving in that environment.
Okay. Well, thank you. Any questions or comments?
Dr. Cook, I had a question long-term about a facility. I know this has been challenging having 4 staff in one room. Do you see it something that we pivot that they do remotely, or what do you see as the future needs for facility?
So we've talked about that quite a bit. We're fortunate right now in that the Hayden Lake site is available and could be used. Plan B and Plan C and the other plans are probably we would be scattering staff all over the district in the spaces that we currently have. We've been looking at possibilities. We've actually walked a few facilities that might be available for rent, just different solutions. And right now I think that it's serving its purpose for now, but even that, as Dr. Orozco has noted, is what you couldn't pick up in the video is that there is a lot of volume, and that volume interferes across all of the participants. So I think right now, if we were to lose this facility, we'd spread them out.
Dr. Cook, off of that, is that a best practice nationally to have them spread out, or is best practice nationally to bring them all together?
We've researched that a little bit, and I think the thing that I would tell you is if it was an established school and had 5 or 6 years of that opportunity to kind of build that continuity and that sense of community, it wouldn't be harmful necessarily to have them spread out like that. I'm a little concerned about that path going forward. I think we would be better served to have them somehow together so that they can build that kind of cohesive understanding of what it means to be in our eSchool K through 12. So we are going to look for solutions that would allow for that to happen. That would be our primary choice.
May I add on just to that too? Thank you. I think, Trustee Smith, one of the visions that we had imagined is that imagine a school where teachers are connecting with students online and they're reaching out to them and they have schedules and they're working, and then in a non-pandemic world that we see groups of kids whether they're 17 or 6, and they're coming together at the eSchool with their teacher, and they're making decisions about who they're going to go interview and where they're going to go draw water from the lake and bring their test tubes, and they're grabbing their materials and they're checking in with their mentors, and they're showing exhibitions of learning there at the school. And it's a very fluid place where there's a lot of movement and a lot of gathering, sharing of ideas and multi-age projects. And that would require a space that allows for teachers to be together, to collaborate, to learn from each other, and also for kids and families to gather and then disperse, in a very fluid sort of schedule. And so that has, if form follows function, that's what we'd be seeking. In best case scenario would be a large space that has room for individual teaching, and then, great rooms for collaboration and that sort of thing.
Dr. Roscoe, is that what you meant by an innovation school? You mentioned K-12.
Right.
Innovation school.
Yeah, I think we'd love, we know our identity right now. Our identity is to provide a safe, secure, and stable setting for lots of kids whose families want their children to have an online experience that they can count on. But that the vision for that, we're evolving into something that feels really innovative, that feels K-12, that feels more project-oriented. And so it's not just the place where we're keeping kids safe, but it's also the place where we're really challenging with really rigorous curriculum and the portrait of graduate characteristics that go along with that. So, yeah, it is. That was my long-winded answer, Rebecca. Yes, it is. Mm-hmm.
And I just have one more quick question for Dr. Cook. Any idea on budget impacts for this new school at this point? I know we're kind of evolving in that, but any sense of how that's going to affect overall budget this coming year?
Not to the extent that we're ready to report out on it yet. Katie's working on that. We have had because of the fact that there's so much overlap with teachers that are sharing space and time in our schools and in the eSchool, in our brick and mortar schools and in our eSchool, it's a little difficult to follow the dollars to some extent, but I think we'll be able to have some of that ready to go here soon, in maybe a month or two. Oh, Katie, I hope you don't stress out from my commitment to time there.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for putting that together, bringing that to us. Nice to allow a greater audience to see what's going on out there, so thank you. We are scheduled to go into executive session, but I think what I'd like to do is maybe just take a quick 5-minute recess if we can, and then we'll come back. It should be a fairly short executive on looks like a legal issue. So why don't we take a recess? It is 12:30. We'll start up an executive at 12:35.